Right, I'll do. Going to bring my mouse back in here. Where am I? There you go. Right. So yeah, thanks for that, Ben. Yes, I definitely felt like for the last 12 months, Network Rail was a secondary role, but I probably shouldn't say that too out loud. But yeah, so I'm going to run through in almost a chronological timeline perspective how we deliver this project as volunteers, and that's the finished article there. So for those of you in the room who don't know me, and that's not. I know where many of you do. So I'm James Barlow. I work at Network Rail. I've done for 10 years, as Ben says. I'm an asset engineer in the geotechnical team covering East Coast and North and East. I have been a drainage designer, geotech designer, and I went through the Network Rail graduate scheme. But I've spent my entire working life after uni at Network Rail. I joined the Keith and Worth Valley Railway in 2010 when I started at Leeds University, mainly to get some experience. Thought it would be interesting, and it's now 2024, and here we are. And in 2019, when my predecessor retired at 70, having been the railway's chief civil engineer for well over 40 decades, I was there, and so I became the chief civil engineer just before the COVID-19 pandemic. Anyone who doesn't know where the Keith and Worth Valley Railway is, it's there, just west of Bradford, and it runs from Keighley to Oxenhope. It's just under 5 miles long, which isn't that long relatively, but it certainly feels like it when we're maintaining the infrastructure. It runs from Keighley to Oxenhope via Ingrode, Mems, Oakworth, as of railway children fame, and Haworth, which is a popular tourist attraction. Opened around 1867 by the local wealthy mill owners, which was the main economy in the area. And then it was closed by British Rail in 1962 and then reopened in 1968 by our volunteers as a steam heritage railway, mainly providing trains for tourists and the like. Just to give a bit of background as to our department and the department I volunteer most of my time in, it's a 100% volunteer department. So everyone that contributes to maintaining all the infrastructure on the Worth Valley is a volunteer and gives their time for free to do so. Our volunteers come from a variety of backgrounds. I'm aware there's many online, there's many in the room today. There's people from such as myself who are civil engineers practicing in the industry, there's retired engineers, but there's also, people who own their own IT company. There's people who are students, there's retired bus drivers, there's people who are paramedics, HGV drivers, there's everything and everything in between as well. We sort of jovially refer to ourselves as a transatlantic bridge construction company, which was a name thought up in the 70s after we renewed our first bridge in the pub after. And the next one was the transatlantic, and that's stuck. So if you've seen any of our sort of social media presence that I'm not involved in because I don't have it, but we refer to ourselves as a transatlantic bridge construction company. And between us, we maintain all of the railway's infrastructure, minus some of the buildings. So buildings that aren't anything to do with the operational railway, such as the sheds, we don't look after. But everything else as a department, we look after. So that's all the S&T, boundaries, vegetation management, bridges, earthworks, drainage, tracks, signalling, platforms, you name it, we look after it between us. I am going to talk a lot about the volunteers and what we achieved on this project. I wouldn't like anyone from any of these companies listening to this presentation to think that I'd forgotten them. So just as a caveat before I talk about the volunteers, designer was Cass Haywood, and I particularly call out to Gareth Davis at Cass Haywood, who, as a non-bridge engineer, he answered a lot of my questions as we were going through this process, and at any point in the day would regularly get a Teams message from me going, Gareth, have you got 2 minutes? Which became a bit of a regular thing, especially as we're going through detailed design. To support us in the CDM aspects, we brought in Vextrix as principal designers, and they undertook that role for us. The KWR itself has 2 separate organisations, and one acted as the client under CDM, and we acted as a principal contractor as well. Temporary works design, Pell Frischman, helpfully one of our volunteers is a geotechnical engineer there, so they helped us with our temporary works design. The bridge fabrication and installation was done by Beaver Bridges, so that was fabricated in their Wigan facility, and they looked after that. Keller, who installed all the piles for the job. We have 2 craning suppliers. One is a volunteer outfit that is based on the Worth Valley called the Palms Loco Society, more on their crane later. And Ainscuff obviously supported us in that. And then there's a few other people. Ian Mitchell Plant Hire did all our plant hiring operators. structural monitoring, and a special mention to the Environment Agency, who were fantastic throughout, and we worked really collaborative with them on this, and you'll see more on that why later. And Wydeen Weaving, who are a business that I imagine none of you have heard of. They make quite a lot of stuff for Queen's Guard and like embroidered military wear, but their car park is next to Bridge 27, and we had unlimited free use whenever we wanted of that car park without any strings attached, and without it we wouldn't have been able to live the project. So they definitely, compared to Network Rail projects, very welcome, and was crucial in delivering the project. So Bridge 27, that's a very old photo, but shows the construction really quite clearly. It's one set of substructure, so it's got two abutments and a central pier, but the superstructure that carries the tracks is very different. So the talk I'm doing today is only on the main line span, which is on the right-hand side there. The siding span is the bridge that is the name of the Transatlantic Bridge Construction Company, and was renewed in 76 or 77. It's in dispute as to what year it was at the moment. But that bridge is still in place and is still there, and we didn't renew that one. It's also, timber weir beams, heavy skew, and it's sat in iron troughs, wrought iron troughs, with flying ends on each end of the weir beams to square off the transition. So quite a pain to maintain for anyone who's maintained that type of structure from a track geometry perspective, and provided a lot of difficulties over the years. And that's just a picture of what it looked like just before we renewed it, with the infill walkways and all the other stuff that goes with it. So it was identified for renewal in about 2014 as part of our structures inspection regime. It was identified as relatively urgent, which was a technical phrase. It was originally built in 1889 using second-hand girders at the time. So at the time, the Midland Railway owned the Keighley and Worth Valley Railway, and they would cascade girders down from the main lines to the branch lines. So although it was built in 1889 as a rebuilt of an earlier structure, it actually, the girders are older than that, and we believe to be an extra 30 years older than that. Substructure was also in poor condition. The weir beams were also in poor condition. In general, the structure needed quite a lot of work. It's also, as I'll run into some pictures in a second, it's a constraint on the river in the section and leads to the flooding of the lower Millhay area of Haworth. So in February 2020, that is Bridge 27, which led to the flooding of, I think, about 12 properties, lots of businesses, and our main depot. So that's taken from the same overbridge behind, and that is our locomotive maintenance depot. The traction motors on diesel engines, which when they get water in, that's pretty much the end of them. They're quite expensive each. So it does do quite a lot of damage. We've done a lot of work to make ourselves more resilient. But yes, it's a cause of flooding in the area. So that flood was 2020, that took a picture of. The same flood happened in 2015. So we've had two of those floods in the last 10 years now. So after the 2015 one, we took a decision to change from a like-for-like renewal to looking at doing something that removes the central pier to increase the river flow. My argument at the time was, if we're renewing this bridge with new components, we're renewing it on a long lifespan. So this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for us to do something here. And at the time, we estimated that cost us about £500,000, and we agreed to do it. And that obviously put back development. And then Bridge 11, which is one of our other underbridges that I've renewed since I took over in 2020, much simpler job. And then the COVID pandemic delayed things further. So 2021 is really when this started properly, with an options report from Cass Haywood. Alan Haywood hand draw the options drawings. I have never seen anything like it. Hand drawn technical drawings of a bridge. I was quite impressed. And at that point, we started to discuss everything with the Environment Agency at the same time. So, and then design development then started properly in earnest in late 2022, where Cass Haywood started the Form A, which the first version of the Form A looked like the drawing on the right, which has a big square end with the bearings a long way behind the abutment walls, which we didn't end up going for, but we went through quite a lot of iterations of Form A, so I just thought I'd include one on the slides. We at that point agreed the project budget. So back in 2016, we thought it'd cost £500,000. It was now 1.25 million. So for us, a lot of our project costs are the materials and specialist contractors. So much of the project management, the normal things that will cost a lot of money on a project, we're doing for free. So actually inflation really impacted in percentage terms what we were doing, because it was impacting every single penny of expenditure for us, because so much of the manpower was for free. So the price of the steel deck in 2020 was estimated at £250,000. By the end of 2022, that would be nearly 600,000. Just in the space of those 2 years, it tripled the price of the steel fabrication. That combined with lots of other factors led to us going for a £1.25 million budget. We've not broken that. It's been delivered under budget. So just in case anyone wondered. And then in early 2023, we assembled our KWVR project team, which is something I just want to linger on for a second. So that consisted of 20 volunteers, and we met every Tuesday, every first Tuesday of the month, 3 months, and then met every other Tuesday for nearly 18 months, nearly 20 of us every 2 weeks, to run through this project and drive it to completion, which was an enormous ask of all of those people that gave up the time, some of whom were in the room. But I think most of us only missed a handful of meetings in those 18 months, and some people dialing in holiday and various other bits to keep it going, which I think a lot of people, certainly on the Worth Valley, don't appreciate that that's how much effort went in behind it to keep it going. So we then, project development seemed to last a long time. One of the key constraints on the site is the overbridge just next to Bridge 27. So that photo is taken by me, and that is stood on Bridge 27 looking towards the north. We're already tight to gauge on that underbridge, so we can't really lift the structure. The track gradient there is about 1 in 60, so we've got no opportunity to lift the track. We're already not diving under the bridge, but we go quite at grade and then under the bridge. We can't drop the soffit because of the flood zone at all. And in fact, the Environment Agency initially opposed to the project based on us needing to get the soffit level to above the flood level plus 300 mil. Can't remember now. But it had involved us raising the track level by about 500 mil. And so very quickly, as I said, there was a bit of an email back and forth, and I said to the Environment Agency, you need to go outside. And I helpfully brought her to site on a day trains were running, so I could stand her off to the side and watch the train go and go, that's why I can't lift the bridge. And very quickly, the Environment Agency were then on board with the project. And it just took that site visit, and that just changed our relationship with them. And after that, they were really easy to work with. And we went through 4 permit applications, and I think only one of them hit any snags at all. It was really quite efficient, and we went through it quite quickly. We also started discussions with Yorkshire Water. In the riverbed through the bridge is a sewer. So we wanted to introduce piles and sorts of Yorkshire Water. And once it established that we weren't trying to do a foul connection into the sewer, which is what they first thought we were trying to ask them for, they provided details that meant actually we were fine. So you can't rotary pile within 3 meters of Yorkshire Water sewer. Our piles were 3.5 meters away. So by a bit of luck, we were well outside that allowance anyway. The other thing we did was engage with Ainscuff Crane Hire. So we heard that another local crane hire firm had applied to get an 80-ton crane into Haworth, and the council just said flat, no, not entertaining it. At that point, that caused a bit of a worry in the project, because the size of crane we needed at that point to lift it was a 500-ton crane. So we were like, if we can't get an 80-ton crane into Haworth, how on earth are we going to get a 500-ton crane into Haworth? So we went to Ainscuff and said, we need to know if this is possible or not, because if it is, we don't want to spend money on design. We don't want to spend money progressing this any further than we already have. Bear in mind, at this point, we've not actually spent a lot of money, just volunteer time. It took a year for Ainscuff to confirm that it was possible, working with the Abnormal Loads Office at West Yorkshire Police and the council. What helped later was we got a £1 million grant from the government minister through the council. So all this was going on at the same time. So the council then worked, well, how do I describe it? The council worked very hard to make sure it happened, because they were facilitating a government grant to one of their local tourist attractions. So Ainscuff worked for a year before that. So we didn't sign any contracts and only spent money on design and volunteer effort until Ainscuff confirmed they could get a crane to site. And by extension, Ainscuff also confirmed that the bridge could get to site as well, as that was quite complicated. We then applied for a grant. Quite a detailed application process. We had to put quite a lot of effort into that. But in September 23, it was confirmed that we've got a £1 million grant from the government, from the Community Ownership Fund, which is a branch of the Levelling Up Fund. And at the time, we're looking for projects that were ready and could show benefit. And we were confident we were close enough to construction. And what that did do is put a time limit on, and we had to be completed by September 2024, which was when we were planning on doing it, but it didn't leave us with a right lot of wiggle room in terms of the planning. And at that point, we started working on all the constructability elements and removing assumptions that we'd made during the development, which was most of them taken by volunteers. One of the issues now, I apologise for what is quite a terrible sketch of what was going on. I tried to do it neater and it was worse. This was the best version of what I managed to produce. The grey lines there is a culvert. So the blue is the water, the river. The black is the abutment line as it is now. And that grey channel is a culvert that comes out in the middle of the abutment. Now, that was the assumed route of the culvert, so we weren't particularly worried about it. And then we discovered that the culvert didn't do that, and we didn't know what it did. And to discover it, we had to take the track off and rip everything out and go and just dig down to find out where it was. The orange is where the culvert actually went. That's a stone culvert. And we also found that the row of cottages next to the bridge didn't used to be where it is now, and there used to be more of them, and the railway knocked some of them down. The red circles are the piles. So we basically worked out that all of that was in the way. There was only one pile that wasn't obstructed from getting in the ground. So that was a nice thing to find out in, I think, about November 2023. But while that was going on, detailed design was being undertaken by Cass Haywood. There's some 3D images of that later, and I'll run a bit more through what the design looks like on the next slide. But all design was undertaken by Cass Haywood with Vectrix in support. The final design, after quite a lot of Form A iterations, we went through 3 or 4 Form A iterations to get it right, but the Form B just then went based on that outline design. So it ended up as a single 23-metre span, half-through girder bridge, which is my best description of it as a geotechnical engineer. It's sat on 2 pile caps, each with 6 16-metre deep, 0.6 diameter reinforced concrete piles as a group. Throughout the design from options, the initial number of piles was 2, then 4, then 5, and then finally 6. And that was one of the things that kept changing through Form A, was the 2 pile option in the initial options report. Couldn't get a piling rig on site to do that. So we went to 4, but then we had to skew the deck because of where the bearings would sit. And that image I showed earlier where it was a square end behind, we worked out we wouldn't be able to access the bearings to maintain them. And so we changed the skewed arrangement that we've got here. And then that introduced the 5th pile. And then slight oversight on my part, I would say. Hidden in the ground investigation report undertaken in 2015 was that artesian water was encountered at 20 metres. The pressure of that artesian water, I think the head was 2 metres above ground when they left it. So that water pressure, if we'd have got piles to that depth and hit that, that's it. You'd be in a lot of trouble. So we reduced it again just to de-risk it. We put the 6th pile in and reduced the depth of the piles even further, with them acting as a pile groove and a single pile cap. There's also transition slabs. As we're going from track that's directly fastened to steel and concrete onto ballast. So we've got the precast transition slabs that sit there as well, and that's the nice 3D image of what it looked like that Cass Haywood produced us for planning. Probably worth knowing at this point, we have to go for planning permission as well, which I've not included on the slide. It's conservation area, so we have to go for prior approval planning, which is they can't reject it unless we are doing something unnecessary. So it was a little bit of a formality, but it still had to be done. It still had to be documented. The reasons we were doing it, the reasons we weren't replacing it like for like. So we were like even down to paint colour choice in a conservation area. So the paint colour of the bridge is that grey is chosen because all our other bridges of similar design are that colour in the valley. So we could easily justify this is why we're painting this colour, because all our other bridges are this colour. The existing handrails are white, so the white. We're going to face everything with stone, and little things like that had to be done just to make sure we maintain the character of the area. At the end of the day, we're Heritage Railway. We're trying to maintain the character of the area for its own means as well. So carrying on with the detailed design, in terms of the track, again, I'm not a track engineer or a bridge engineer, but the track's directly fastened to the steel deck with Pandrol Viper base plates, and it's also attached to the concrete abutment as well with those. We were surprised how effective they are at reducing the vibration and the noise. We were slightly worried that when the train started running, having been bull-head track on timber way beams, we were worried that the noise and the vibration was going to increase with houses really nearby. We're quite impressed with how much they do reduce the noise while you're over it. no louder than the noisy heritage engines that we use. The base plates are attached separately to a steel seating plate on the bridge, which was I was quite impressed with, quite an interesting design from Cass Haywood. They have used it on Network Rail projects before, but effectively this type of base plate, you'd end up having to bolt from underneath the bridge. And so if we ever needed to change a base plate, that involves safely going in the river and undoing bolts underneath the bridge. So what happened is the seating plates were bolted to the bridge with tapped holes in the car park before we installed it. And so the panel plates are just sat on threaded bars, which means all the track maintenance can be done from the deck. None of it needs to go underneath, which was a good bit of design by Cass Haywood. Steel deck still skewed, as I showed on the last picture, with the pile cap square upstand to square off the track alignment and transition slabs running off. The pile caps are separate from the existing stone abutments that the bridge is sat on. So the existing stone abutments were just reduced in level and are going to stay as river training walls effectively. And they've received some repair work, and some of that substructure work is still going on. And then we can demolish the central pier beneath the mainline span. So the idea is that I hope in more than 20 years, but when the siding span will need renewing in my normal lifetime, say, and the idea is that we will do almost the same thing again and remove that central pier completely, which increases the cross-sectional area of the river by something like the order of 25 to 30%, which is quite a substantial increase. And what we are doing, and I'll move on to probably next year, is doing a Form A with contractor input from everyone who built this bridge. So we've got an outline design on the shelf with all the experience from everyone who built the first one that can sit there. And we don't have a standard that says when that design runs out, so that design can stay on the shelf for as long as we want, and then we'll just do a check when the time comes to the updated standards. So just some more images of the design just to run through. So you can see there's still the heavy skew on the deck with then the squared off cap, and you can see the transition slabs either end. You can also see that the piles are sat quite a long way behind the existing abutment, which when I run through how we constructed it, that'll become clear why we did that as well. It did increase the span slightly, but I'll go into it later. Just more detail on that end structure, where you can see where the bearings sit in line with those front three piles, and then the back ones are just squaring it off. And that's the cross section of what it looked like, showing it's on quite a steep gradient as well. And even without considering the rebar, that pile cap's quite a complex bit of concrete, and we didn't do that. We definitely didn't do that. A subcontractor for Beaver Bridges came in and did that, and really impressive to watch their technique, for want of a better word, of getting that installed. And then the transition slab came precast, that you can see on the far left of the bottom image. So alongside the detailed design, there was a lot of prep work going on. So this is the image of the culvert that we exposed. So you can see the bridge in the background, and our volunteers in a wet hole in November because we haven't got anything better to do, uncovering the drainage. Site investigations November 2023. So this was the first time where we did a Sunday evening volunteer turning up after the steam trains are finished, taking the track off. Some work goes on midweek, and then we came back Friday afternoon and we put the track back, and we did that with volunteers. In February, we then came back and had another possession without taking the track off, which diverted all the KWR signal and telecommunication services. So that consisted of, in a week, 5 under-track crossings, 200 metres of cable ducting, and we also installed lots of fencing around the site on the retaining walls because of the amount of work going on in this area just to protect people from the river edge. I can't remember what else we did that week. We did more, but I can't find pictures of it, so I can't remember. And all the while this is going on, we're now properly engaged with Beaver Bridges and Keller, working through constructability, working through how we're going to build it. Particularly Keller, the Worth Valley, as far as our records show, these are the first piles on the railway of any type. So that includes the original construction, all the buildings, all the bridges, everything. We believe these are the first piles that have ever been installed of any type on the railway. But we haven't got, as a volunteer organisation, experience of delivering that. So Keller came in and provided a lot of that support, along with Pelfrishman in terms of temporary works. Preparatory work continued. So by this point, we're regularly on site. Pelfrishman designed the piling platforms, locally sourced stone, which I like to include. You can see the quarry from the bridge. You could hear the lorry leave the quarry. It was that close, so we're quite impressed with that. Although when we had to excavate for the pile caps, the company that the registered waste carrier was initially stored the waste on top of the other side of the hill. So all we did was pay a lot of money for some stone on one side of the valley to be taken out, brought down to the bottom of the valley, compacted in layers, and then dug out and taken to the other side of the valley. So I don't know if we all died now and in the future, I don't know what any archaeologists would think of what we were up to. So the drainage that we found in a week possession in April, again, track off Sunday after the last train, back on Friday. Our volunteers with the machine operators diverted the drain on the south side of the bridge, and we installed a piling platform on the north side of the bridge. So the piling platform was 700 mil of compacted 6F5 with some geogrids, biaxial geogrids in the base. Very interesting. We've never done that work before, but it was very, very interesting to do. Pell Frishman provided a lot of support, as I've already said, and it also quite advantageous for teaching a lot of our newer volunteers that weren't from the industry using laser levels, which is quite good. We've now bought our own. We never had one, so it's good training as well. All these jobs are good training with engineers supervising, and then our non-engineering volunteers actually delivering the work under our supervision and learning a lot of good skills. During this job, we've actually doubled the amount of site foremen, so our version of Network Rail costs. We've doubled the amount of site foremen we have, and all those people have been able to use this project as really good training for being able to do work. We also learned just how congested the site is and how tight it is, and trying to get materials in and out. And you can see we're already making use of Weaving's car park. At this point, Dividag came in and installed monitoring on the structure. So the abutments and central pier all had live tilt meters on that came to the project team's phones. So if any movement occurred, we were warned straight away. And we also had targets scattered across the site that were monitored free weekly. And we just keeping an eye on everything. We already knew that a lot of the masonry wasn't in good condition. And as you can see from that photo, it's quite intrusive work that we were doing around it. All this was done on the basis of trying to keep the railway running at weekends for revenue, with the amount that this was going to cost. But also we're doing a lot of work at Keighley Station, and we need to do some locomotive overhauls. So we're trying to keep that revenue coming in on weekends. Not only that, but quite a lot of the department are still working age, so we don't have a huge amount of retired people in the department. Planning leave and personal lives and everything else that goes with it, we couldn't just do the job in one go like we'd want to, because none of us could take 3 months off work or 2 months off work or whatever it was to do. So that's why this regular taking the track on and off came. And at the same time, while this is going on, we're entering into formal contracts with Keller for the piling and Beaver Bridges for the steel deck fabrication, which is going on in the background. So then in May 2024, we piled, and I always use this photo to demonstrate how congested that site was. It's a testament to not only Keller, but anyone from the Worth Valley who did any of the site management on this. We had no incidents at all. Everything was planned. Everything was communicated. The piling guys were briefed. And even though we had trains running through the site, there was no issues. Everything was timed so that the piling rig could stand down, and we would use those breaks from the piling rig to get our material in and out of site. And we worked together to get that done. That's 2 consecutive weeks where we came on a Sunday night and took the track off, and came on a Friday and put it back, which was only a week off between the last photo as well. So in April and May, our volunteers turned out on 3 out of 4 Sunday nights to take the track off, and 3 out of 4 Fridays to put the track back to allow us to carry on running trains. In hindsight, that wasn't the best idea, really. We probably shouldn't have done that. We should have just said, we're not going to run on that weekend, but hindsight's a wonderful thing. The Keller supervisor said it was the best piling rig platform he'd ever drilled off, which I will take to my grave as a compliment. I suspect it's because we didn't know how to build piling mats, so we didn't go, we're not the designer, we know better. We just did what the designer said to the absolute letter, and I suspect that's why they were one of the best mats they'd ever drilled off. Railway then reopened for the summer with TSR. It removed a lot. We felt getting this foundation piling work out of the way before the main blockade took a lot of risk out. It also gave us a good few months off between the big possessions to recuperate. And so the railways were open with TSR for the summer, because although our line speed is only 25 mile an hour, it was very intrusive work, so we reopened. That's just another aerial shot of the work going on the piling rig, which is, for those who are interested, is a Hootie 204 restricted access piling rig. On the first day, someone stole the controller for the rig. And on Tuesday morning at 8 o'clock, I was told, we haven't got a spare controller. There's nothing we can do. We can't control it manually. I think that rig stuck there for 2 weeks, and it was just stood on the rig, stood there. And I very nearly had a full-on sense of humour failure. And I think my wife, who was looking at me in the audience, she got a very frantic phone call from me going, "What on earth am I going to do now?" To credit to Keller and their plant supplier, there was a controller on site 4 o'clock the next day, and the rig worked, and they then worked extra hours, and it was all handed back on time. But yes, very entertaining. Once we finished piling, it then moved. Right, bridge fabrication. So Beaver Bridge was working on the fabrication over the summer. There was lots of challenges with this. Not something we were used to supervising as a client or sort of as a contractor, awarder. Lots of challenges around tolerances and the direct fastening nature. Timescales got really tight due to some problems in the supply chain with some of the steel. Left us less time to adjust the track design based on how the bridge was actually sitting. So the bridge is designed with a camber, and theoretically, X of that camber falls out. And I think when they'd finished it and they turned it over and put it on its supports, it by that point was that stiff that the bridge just laughed at us and stayed where it was and didn't drop any of the camber out, which meant the track vertical alignment needed redesigning. But then when you grip blast and paint it, some of that might fall out, so then the vertical alignment needs to be redesigned again. So there was a lot of that going off at the same time over the summer. Long lead times, but spoiler alert, it was all put in on time. It was fine. One of our fellow volunteers said after the piling, you'll be enjoying a summer off. So our summer off was not a summer off. As we went into the detail of the programme, we realised that to keep our blockade to 19 days in September, there's 2 reasons for keeping the blockade to 19 days. One was it's shut the railway for longer. But the other one is we did not have enough volunteer resources with annual leave to run a 26-day possession. They just, even with about 8 different site foremen, 4 different civil engineers, there just wasn't enough of us to manage that. So we had to keep it to 19 days. And that meant the bridge needed to be demolished as soon as possible on the Sunday evening to get beavers on site Monday morning and get them cracking with the pile caps. So we basically demolished whatever we could. So a lot of the walkways and a lot of the infrastructure that supported the walkways, we took that out in August and got rid of it as fast as we could. We finalised all the permits and all the paperwork. Obviously, as principal contractor, we're responsible for construction phase plan and all the paperwork that comes along with that, all the crane, making sure temporary design for the crane work was all done, getting the site set up, plant routes, road closures with the council for the cranes coming in, liaising with the community, and various other bits. As to get the crane and the bridge in, we had to put the only road into a housing estate of 400 people for 30 minutes. So that, again, making sure that all that community liaison was right. We got away with only 1 complaint through the whole job, which is quite good. We technically had 2 complaints, but the first one came the day after with biscuits and apologised, so we're counting it as only 1 complaint through the job. And that's one of our engineering trains that we ran. We were out, I would say, 2 evenings a week throughout the whole of August and weekends, running engineering trains to get materials to site, and the huge amount of volunteer effort that went into getting that delivered, loaded onto wagons, unloaded off wagons, and prepared. So by the time the last train, time the last train ran, that's what the bridge looked like, which was not much of it was left by that point. So that's 16:20 on Sunday, the 1st September, and was the last train to go off. As you can see on the siding line to the right, we've already got cranes prepped. They're ready. Our volunteers are lined up waiting. The impact wrench for the fish plates is already primed and ready to go in the bottom right corner of that. And so I always like to say this when I compare what we do to the national network. It takes around 5 minutes for us to take a possession, and that's it. It's great. It's fantastic. We don't sit in a van waiting for hours in the night for a possession. It's quick as that. So about 5 minutes after the last train passed, we were taking fish plates off and removing rails and getting the track out. That crane, for anyone who's interested, is a 50-ton Craven steam crane. It's originally a breakdown crane that would have lived on the West Coast Main Line. It's from 1930, fully steam powered, fully operational. It's the second bridge renewal we've used it on. Fantastic piece of kit. The best thing about it is, compared to any diesel crane, you can hear yourself think, you can communicate with the driver. There's not a diesel generator ruining all your comms. You can just go up and speak to the driver and it's silent. Good bit of kit. We also have another steam crane that was used for the PWI elements, but that on Sunday the 1st, the job was get the track out, get the bridge out, get the crane away so the beaver bridges can start first thing on Monday morning. And to do that, we cancelled the last train of the day. We felt cancelling one round trip of our railway to save a week was worthwhile, and that's what we did. We then demolished the abutment and the central pier alongside the beavers doing the work through the demolition. Pile caps, which is at this point our volunteers, a lot of them, it took a bit of a stand back. There was probably 5 or 6 of us on site every day, sort of managing everything, including site cabins, making sure the access points were manned, making sure people were getting inducted and getting signed in properly. And then our engineers and site foremen managing the overall site. And that's the concrete pouring on the first pile cap there. I haven't got any good photos, I don't know why, of the rebar close up. Really impressive and intricate rebar that went into that pile cap. We used rapid setting concrete, Rapid Creek. Can't remember what the brand name is from concrete. Can't remember. Which went hard in 2 to 3 hours and cured sufficiently to strike formwork at around 12 hours. So we went for extra expense to procure that through Beavers. They had it as one of the options on the contract as an extra. We went for it. With normal concrete, the bridge was ready to be landed about half on Saturday morning, and it was ready Friday night. By doing this, we gave ourselves 2.5 days contingency. They used almost every hour of that contingency, so we were very glad we did that. The side constraints reared their head again with managing the excavations adjacent to the siding line difficult. So we were still using the siding line to support beavers moving materials around and ourselves. And the excavations eventually we had to stop all that, and we had to change how we ran the site to remove those train movements. It was a very, very constrained site again, unsurprisingly. And you can see in that photo that we've got most of the central pier demolished, which a lot of our volunteers did by hand in the river because that was the EA requirement of the plant in the river. So a lot of that was done by hand, as in loosening and then lifted out by cranes. I didn't do much of that. It wasn't much fun. While that work was carrying on, that's the main bridge being delivered. That is how tight it was on both sides of that road as it reversed into the car park. I think it was about 14-point turn it did on the roundabout. The bridge also then required quite a lot of work in the car park, so it was there for about a week while they added the walkways, which couldn't come because they knocked all the lampposts down in Bradford. So the walkways were added in the car park, as were all the pandrol plates and the seating plates, touching up with the paintwork and the concrete trimmer beams at the end, which someone did explain to me what trimmer beam was, but I've forgotten. The nighttime delivery had to happen, so we blocked this road for 30 to 45 minutes at this point. Fortunately, the housing estate has a really active Facebook group, and some of our volunteers live in that housing estate. So we recruited some volunteers to be our eyes on the ground and posted for days in advance saying, we're anticipating the bridge at this time, we're anticipating the bridge at this time. What all it ended up with, they all came out in the dressing house to watch the bridge get delivered, was how it ended up. But we didn't block a single person in from doing anything. Everyone that had to go to work between the hours we were expecting took the car out of the estate beforehand, and anyone that needed anything special spoke to us before, and we managed to not really cause much disruption despite that at the time. As I say, lots of community engagement. We did 5 or 6 rounds of letter drops and ran drop-in sessions as well, which again was all done. Even all the delivery was done by volunteers. Some more pictures of the fancy lorry. I'd never seen a lot like this. It was very impressive. Coming out and disabling parts of the lorry so that when it turns, the wheels didn't turn, but then going back and re-enabling it to do a certain manoeuvre. Yeah, it was quite impressive to watch. And that's it then sat in the Wydene Weaving car park, which looked massive, and now more than half of it was taken up by the bridge. And again, how important it was that we had that space next to where we were going. Without it, we wouldn't have done the project. We did offer them a nice evening special for all their staff, and we ran them a steam train with a bar. The steam train broke down then, so diesel, but they still had the bar. The bar worked fine, but we did that as a thank you. So then to the main lift. Considering it was the day that we'd been planning for roughly for about 2 years, it went without any problems at all. The weather was absolutely glorious. There was no wind. We reckon there was about 200 people there watching. That crane arrived at 8 o'clock, and there was people stood on that bridge from 8 o'clock until the job was done. That was finished at about 4, and there was people that were stood there all day. Fair play to them. I didn't stand there all day. Police escorts both ways, again, same as the bridge. So everything had to go to Hartshead North Services on the M62 and wait for its police escort from there, and be taking a special route through Bradford, with them progressively closing roads. One of the bridges in the local area to get the crane across had to be plated and have traffic management put over it, and the highways engineers had to be on site to watch it. I don't think Ainscough weren't keen on their £4 million crane going over a bridge and then getting stuck in Haworth, so they sent the ballast weight across first, as that was a bit more dispensable. But the highways engineers were ultimately happy, and the crane went in. Again, I don't think we've used anything bigger than 100-ton crane in the history of the Worth Valley, so this was a 450-ton. Very, very good piece of kit, was my review. And Ainscough were absolutely fantastic, and got working with us. Yeah, watch around 250 people, and a lot of our volunteers happened to be available that day to help on site. It was a shock. I don't know how that happened. I can't remember if there's anything else. So then, coming towards the end, once the bridge was in, it wasn't over. So our volunteers then got on with what they know how to do best, which is the track reinstatement. This is our 10-ton Grafton P-Way crane, maintained and operated by many people, including Keith and Margaret here, as well as several other volunteers, a few of whom are on the call out there. Track renewed with £113 flat bottom. I think that's the right terminology. During that last week, we installed all the track, including breather switches, as we decided to have a wider track renewal in the bridge area, transitioning from bullhead to flat bottom track. But we're also going to make this one of the first sections of continuous welded rail. So we've installed the breather switches ready for that, and got some welding done ready as well. That'll be undertaken next year. And then we also had the final concrete pours, installing the transition slabs. The transition slab, we'd already installed one of them, and doing all the grouting of the concrete bearings. Everything like that was done in that third week. And so I think Thursday evening at 7 o'clock, beavers were then done and left us on Friday, that's the first train over the bridge, which was a ballast train, and that was on Friday morning. While this was all going on, we were also starting to demobilise the site, cleaning cabins, removing fencing, removing signage, cleaning Winding Weavers car park to give it back to them, as well, as we'd made quite a mess in 3 weeks. Cleared half a mile of railway scrap and litter, and aligned the track to level and alignment to allow us to reopen without TSR. So our volunteers had a happy afternoon on 8 of the Robel hand tampers. There's a few people in the audience that had a happy afternoon on Robel tampers. And then at 8 o'clock on Friday the 19th, we handed the possession back, and I would like to say that's the final possession of Bridge 27, but I think we've got one on Thursday and Friday to carry on doing some of the snagging work, so it's not quite the last, but certainly the last one with the track off. So I pointed out the contractors we worked with, and this is definitely not an exhaustive list, but I just wanted to run through what the volunteers actually did on this project over the 4 years. It was a main project. All the project management, all the project engineering, including writing the DRNs. We have our own version of DRNs now. They're not as complicated as NetRail. We have our own versions of that. All the document keeping, and we acted as principal contractor throughout. All the appointed person associated lift planning. The Ainscough lift was a contract lift, so obviously not much involvement from us on that. But all the rail craning work that was ongoing throughout, with multiple possessions of rail cranes working, was all done by us and managed by us. We coordinated all the projects and site activities together, all the different contractors, and we managed the site. Our volunteers were the site managers throughout. Our engineers had approved and signed off all the works. We installed and managed all the temporary works. So although Pelfrishman is the plan platform, our volunteers installed it, and that also includes all the arrangement of the cabins, from cleaning them to the electronics, to making sure we had Wi-Fi, to arranging security, meeting security every morning and evening, all the fencing, all the signage, all the briefing volunteers, briefing local people, all done by volunteers. All the track design, removal, reinstatement, all done by our volunteers. All the operational planning of the hundreds of works trains that we ran was done by our volunteers, as well as all the possession management and running the actual trains. They're all driven by our volunteers. All the community liaison work, all the demolition work, and all the drinking of tea. So the 19-day blockade, we had electronic signing on it, signing in and out. Volunteers in that 19 days with 2,800 hours. And that's only the 19 days of the project that I've just shown you in terms of hours, and didn't include any of the other work, and doesn't include any of the work that we're still doing now. Challenges. I thought I'm not going to stand here and pretend it went rosily. It certainly had its challenges and made me feel a lot older than I was at the start. Volunteers are fantastic, and volunteers are a massive pain. Is probably the balance there. Managing relationships with other departments, managing expectations of other volunteers. Generally, volunteers are really understanding. Some people couldn't understand why we wanted to close our car park on the day we had a crane and 5 wagons arriving in a car park that only just fits a crane and 5 wagons arriving, for example. But general volunteers were good, but it can make it tricky. The tight access within the site, I don't think any of us appreciated when we started how tight everything was and how much particularly plant movements would need to be supervised and managed at all times. How restricted the site was from an engineering perspective with the flooding river, the adjacent overbridge, our main engineering yard and the Yorkshire Water Sewer, stopping us from moving anything laterally and vertically. We had about a 20 mil window to take the soffit and the rail level through, and that was it. That's all we had. So hats off to Cass who made that work, and our track engineer. Grant funding requiring the completion of the project in September 2024. While that was always the intention, there was definitely points in March, April where if that grant hadn't been there, we'd have paused and stopped and we'd have taken stock and delayed what we were doing, particularly with the way inflation was impacting costs. Fortunately, that grant allowed us to do the project to its end, but it also put a lot of pressure on us to get that project finished in September 2024. Requiring the closure of the only road into housing estate for extended periods. We never realised when we started that we'd have to close the road so much. And so realising that late on, at one stage we were looking at closing it for up to 3 hours. And at that point, that becomes getting emergency services into the housing estate to be stationed there. Gladly, we avoided that at the time, because even though when we closed it for up to half an hour, at any point during those manoeuvres, that lorry could have just gone straight out onto the road and let the emergency services in, which is how we then managed that access. Minimising disruption to the local community as much as possible. KWR is very proud of the fact it runs every weekend of the year. Those who don't know Heritage Railways might know that we are one of the few that do that. Most have a big shutdown in the winter and let their volunteers go out and do big maintenance. We run every weekend of the year and are proud of it. Makes it a challenge to fit in getting work done. And the lack of records of underground obstructions. They were some of the main challenges that I could think of when I was putting this slide together. I'm fairly sure there's people in the room that will remember more of what we went through to deliver it, but I thought I'd just cover some of them. I think that is it. So I don't know how long I've been. I tried to be 45 minutes. How did I do? Yeah.
Okay, thanks, James. Any questions?
Would you have gone through the whole process the exact same way, or was there anything major you'd done differently?
I don't know what I'd done differently. I wouldn't have delivered the piling phase and the renewal phase in the same year. That's the main thing I would change. It felt like we were planning for the blockade, and there's people in the room that will remember when this dawned on us. We were planning for the blockade thinking that's going to be really hard, and then looked at all the preparatory work and the piling mats and the piling and looked and went, what are we doing? Why have we planned to do this over 4 weeks and come every week? So I would not be taking the track off on Sunday night and putting it back on Friday as regular as we did. We massively hit volunteer fatigue during the process amongst the project team and the general volunteers. It just wasn't enough because we didn't have enough time. So I would spread it out more, I think. But the grant also did that. But yeah, I think that's probably one of the main things I do differently. I don't think of much else at this moment.
Okay. Question from Bob Wright online. As a fellow Heritage Railway engineer, I recognise many of the constraints, resourcing and planning issues you had to overcome as a project. Really impressive job and a great talk to. Did you consider omitting the inner side walkway?
I don't know which the inner side is. Oh, the 6 foot side. No. So we track inspect on a weekend because our volunteers are free on a weekend. We run trains on a weekend, so we need to be able to inspect that track as it's still joint track. We inspect it weekly, and so we need the walkways to be able to actually inspect the track as much as anything and be able to see over those beams, because we've now prohibited any access to the bridge while trains are running because there's no position of safety at all, whereas there was previously. So no, the walkways are there as much for inspection as much as anything else.
Good stuff.
I'd just like to comment, not a question. I think it's quite a brilliant scheme. Thing I particularly like is the attention you took to run on, run off, and by squaring up the abutment. That was a fantastic idea. To try to come off on the skew is asking for trouble. So very, very impressive, and also putting in the run on, run off slabs. You know, Network Rail could take note of that when they play about with the wading bridges.
So in terms of the detail, Cass Haywood, that's all Cass Haywood. I can't really take any credit for that. But one of the advantages for us for going for the much more expensive scheme and doing this was trying to remove that maintenance liability of the run on, run off way beam that we've had trouble with for as long as I have been at the railway. We've had trouble maintaining the track geometry through there. So that was one of our, I suppose that's one of our requirements that we put to Cass as part of the design brief, is that we wanted to square off, and we initially squared the steel deck off and then realised that we were adding so much steel to the project that it just didn't make sense, and then they came up with a concrete design. It rides well. I can confirm the pint test was passed with flying colours on the opening day.
Stuff. Positive feedback again from Steve Valentine. Andrew Anderson, did you consider using £98 flat bottom for the renewal, as it would have given you more vertical clearance to play with?
I cannot comment on what our track engineer considered. He may have done. He may have done. I remember him explaining to me why he picked £113 at the time. I don't remember now. Sorry.
With this part of the double bridge, you've taken off the middle pier. How is that going to impact if you get flooding again? Has that changed it?
So the river's already changed what it does. So the way the water flows under the river is under the bridge has changed. You can see when you go under how much wider it is, because you can look upstream effectively, because a lot of the year you can get in the river, it only runs about 150 mil high. So it's safe to get in, so you can look up. What I was worried about was it coming round the newly exposed front face of that and scouring it. So what we effectively did is we demolished it at 45 down, came down in steps from where the last point where it was maintained, holding the walkway, came down in 45 steps, discovered that the middle between the two skins of stone was mud. And then what we then did was drilled resin anchors into the end stones with rebar, and then reinforced, and then there's now a reinforced concrete cap on the end that ties the whole end of that central pier together, which is out of sight. It's not very neat, but good. But we used leftover concrete from the main pours to do that as well.
And the Environment Agency happy with that?
Yeah, happy with that. No, the Environment Agency, there's a benefit to the local area of improving the river flow. So the Environment Agency are really thrilled by it, because they're not going to spend any money to reduce flood risk in this particular case. They are having to do other works, and I've had meetings with the EA recently about the flood scheme here, but it improves the situation.
You said there were unexpected difficulties with excavations adjacent to the siding line that you were continuing to run. Could you say a bit more about that? What had you expected to happen?
No, it wasn't unexpected as in unexpected ground conditions, and I probably unexpected is the wrong word. Is we did foresee quite how constrained that excavation was going to be. So we'd excavated in there a lot to do the piling platforms, and we were happy with how that was managed in the depths. I don't think until Beavers got on site, they'd appreciated how much room the rebar contractors wanted extra, and that extra metre ate all the available space to batter the slope without affecting the siding span. Yeah. So it was still safe to pass. What we did, we just changed how we minimised the train movements, and basically cleared the area before we moved anything through, just in case it caused a bit of an excavation to go. It actually didn't, and it stayed stable. Probably because there's a compactor piling platform there that kept it, when it was battered back, kept everything really stable. But yeah, that was it was not quite the appreciation of how much room the rebar contractors wanted from both us and Beavers. We just didn't pick it up in the detail when we were planning the job, and then it didn't cause issues. It caused us to change how we did it.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
Another question.
Perfect there.
I assume someone's done a back of the envelope calculation on what this would have cost. Was it?
I don't know. I defer to someone from Capital Delivery Network Rail who might know how much something like this would cost.
I've made a note. I've got a new benchmark now.
It's going to go in the cost.
I don't declare it outside this room, though. I don't need everyone to know you can deliver an underbridge for 1.25 million.
What I think is worth context, which I didn't provide at the start, in terms of the most expensive project the railways delivered before this in terms of civil engineering is 150,000. That's the biggest project we've ever delivered before this one. So it was quite a step up for us in terms of what we delivered and what we did, which is why there was 20 of us working on it throughout. I don't want to say what I think it cost a lot more than 1.25 million. You've got about also suppliers. A lot of suppliers have charity rates that we used. There are people who live locally, so we didn't have to pay for any site visits by Pell Frishman because one of their people lives in Oakworth, for example, and could just pass on his way to the shop. Little things like that all add up as well as all the stuff we did for free and without any payment.
Good stuff. You've inspired Aaron Crawford online to say, great presentation, James. Incredible effort by everyone involved. It would be great to set up a lessons learned workshop with Network Rail and wider industry colleagues, which clearly I'm going to agree with. I think that's a fantastic idea. And it particularly reflects on the positive stakeholder engagement involved. So
probably,
well done.
Since Aaron, who is my boss's boss at work, it's probably worth shouting out to Deborah, who will at some point, whilst this is my line manager, who let me work so flexibly without Network Rail's volunteer leave and flexible way to buy annual leave, without them letting me work flexibly my hours. Well, I couldn't have done this at all. So I think Deborah, definitely my boss, deserves a lot of credit. She was brilliant throughout in letting me deal with this. And if something came in through from a contract in the day, as long as I didn't have a meeting, as long as I didn't have a deadline, I was just able to go and deal with that and then catch the hours up later in the evening. That made it possible ultimately. So. Sorry, Deborah.
Good stuff. Okay, so fascinating talk. Thank you very much again for joining us. The amount of stakeholder involvement required takes a bit of getting your head around, doesn't it? It's great to hear how you're capturing the learning from those involved this time on this span in producing that early design future reference next time. And I am going to take you up on the opportunity to look at wider learning as well. I've also enjoyed hearing about how you've developed the engineering skills of those involved as well. And that's a great picture to finish on in terms of lots of people in Orange who wouldn't have had the opportunity necessarily to get involved in this kind of scheme had you not shown that leadership and got them involved. Great community engagement. As I say, new benchmark for me in terms of delivering underbridge renewals. I think it's a phenomenal effort by everyone involved. So thank you, James. If we can say thank you in the usual manner, that would be great. Thank you also to the 20 or so people that joined us online, in addition to the 29 of them. So I think that's an audience of 50, I reckon, which is a good turnout for a Tuesday evening.
Bonfire night as well.
On bonfire night as well. Yeah, absolutely. So thanks to AECOM for hosting us once again. If we could do AECOM a favour by clearing up our crockery as we're on our way out and dropping it back in the kitchen, that would be great. And for those of us that are heading near the station, then I think the hop is a suitable calling off point on the way to the train. It is for me anyway. So I'm sure James will be there for one as well. Okay, thanks all.
Thanks very much.
See you soon.
I don't know.
Okay, but I went down to 2 minutes. No, I know.